All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar, Strategies for Recruiting Adult Learners. My name is Nicole. I'm the Education and Training Coordinator for the Florida Literacy Coalition, and this webinar is hosted by FLC and made possible through the support of the Florida Department of Education, Division of Career and Adult Education. Before we get started, I'd like to turn your attention over to your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Your control panel will automatically minimize if you are not using it. If you'd like to bring it back out, just click the red arrow. Please note that there's also a box for questions in your control panel. There you can ask all questions for the presenter and technical questions. For the technical questions, I will be answering that privately in the questions box. The questions for the presenter will be read aloud. So please submit your questions at any point throughout the webinar, but note that we are only going to be reading them a few times throughout the webinar. All right, also there is a handout section of your control panel. In the handout section, you will find a copy of this PowerPoint that you can download ahead of time so you can follow along. All right, and with that, I would like to go ahead and pass it over to our presenter today, Greg Smith, Executive Director for Florida Literacy Coalition.
Okay, thank you, Nicole. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. I hope you're having a good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this discussion about recruiting students, adult education and literacy students. We're going to be sharing with you today a little bit about a market research project that we implemented last year and some of the results from that. I want to give a special shout out to our friends in Oklahoma. Rebecca Baker at the Literacy Resource Office at the Oklahoma Department of Libraries contacted me, interested in this session and potentially doing a webinar, and we kind of combined forces, and I know we have about at least 22 signed up from Oklahoma, so welcome our friends from Oklahoma. They do great work out there in their library-based system and in adult education in general. And I know we have a few folks from other states as well, so all are welcome. So the project that we're going to be focused on here, at least for the majority of the presentation, is a market research initiative that we did in 2019, relatively modest in scope, but the notion was to kind of take a look at what are some of the factors, key messages, terminology, communication methods that may be more or less effective in recruiting adult learners into adult education programs. As a field, we're only reaching about 10% of those in need. So looking at strategies to do this is something keenly of interest to a lot of programs, and as is done with many, especially in the for-profit field, to really look to the customers, in this case our students, to really gain some knowledge as to how to best go about doing that. The focus groups were held at 3 different locations. In our thanks to Seminole State College, the Adult Literacy League, which is a nonprofit literacy organization here in Orlando, and Hillsborough Community College over in the Tampa area for making their students available to do this. And certainly thanks also to the Florida Department of Education who funded this effort. Now, I wanted to just mention from the get-go that everybody in these focus groups were enrolled in sort of traditional ABE or adult literacy programs. This did not include ESL students. We're actually doing a second part to the study this year that focuses on ESL students. It did, however, contain a good cross-section of students in terms of the level that they were at, literacy learners right up through those studying for the GED, as well as sort of gender and age um, distribution as well. So one of the things we wanted to explore were motivations, including sort of concerns and assumptions around enrolling in adult education. And this is very much a qualitative approach that we took here. Jobs and employment were at the top of the list in terms of those most specifically cited reasons that folks were engaging in adult education, continuing their education. But so were, second to that, were motivations related to self-improvement, self-fulfillment, personal pride, bettering oneself, the notion of completing something that went unfinished. And this was a theme that resonated throughout, is one that I think adult education programs really need to pay attention to. I'm going to share one quote from a student that I think encapsulated a number of comments that we received sort of on this topic area. This was from a woman who was, I would say, in her early 50s, and she said, sometimes at my age, you don't complete things that you start. And so you just go on with life and you just let it happen. But in the back of your head, it's always there that you didn't complete that one thing. And this was that one thing I knew I needed to do to feel complete, closure. So this is something that I think reflected the sentiments of a number of students, that this was something that wasn't necessarily tied in all cases to getting a job or a better job or any specific goal of that nature, but something that they just felt they needed to do, go back and complete their high school education. So it was a huge motivator for many. Now, the Adult Literacy League students, and that's that ALL there, were more likely to mention skill development. And these are students who tend to be more at the literacy level. So just to note that throughout, that these are students who are at a lower level for the most part. And they tended to specifically mention skills around sort of reading, writing, math skills. One gentleman said, I want to learn how to write sentences, things of that nature. We asked students about their concerns and apprehensions, if they had any, and if so, what were they? And they were pretty open in sharing. There were quite a few concerns and apprehensions that were mentioned. Now, this is in the context of when they first got started. So we asked them to kind of think back to that time period and before they enrolled in adult education, and what was on their mind at that point. So here's some of the concerns that were raised. You can kind of see a theme here. I've been out of school a long time, too long. The worries about whether they are qualified, and that was particularly true for like community college programs because it's a college type setting. So that can cut both ways. I think students can have a lot of pride sometimes in saying they're attending community college, but also they may have some misconceptions about what the qualifications are going to be. Am I too old? Is this really the right place for me? Concerns about whether they'll be able to keep up and meet expectations. Just not knowing what to expect, I think, is part of it. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today, that programs can really share information that can kind of help address some of these concerns and apprehensions right from the get-go. And of course, fear of failure. A lot of these students, were not successful initially, in education in the past. So that was definitely a reoccurring theme that came up quite a few times. We asked about their use of technology and the internet in particular. Students from the community colleges and school districts programs, those two programs regularly use the internet. That was by and large true of almost all the students. The Adult Literacy League students who tended to be a little bit lower level, as I mentioned, and also tended to skew a little bit older in that particular group, used the internet less or not at all. We did have a few folks, and these were groups of 10. We had a few folks who did not, were not users of the internet, or had barely ever even had any exposure to the internet. Those who are, smartphones are the primary way that they're accessing, but quite a few of the students also mentioned that they had tablets and computers that they use to access the internet and utilize it. We asked students about how they learned about the program, and also what their recommendations would be in terms of other students learning about the program. Word of mouth was the most frequently referenced, especially with community colleges. Friends or family had attended the college. And this is, for those of you who are in a community college setting, this was kind of interesting that a number of students went out of their way saying, you really need to let everybody on the campus know that these programs exist on the college campus, because if the students know that they exist, then they're more likely to make a referral to somebody who may be in need of a different set of skills than what they happen to be studying. Almost all agreed that they had seeds planted in their minds prior to actually going to sign up for a program. So this is an important one, and I'm sure many of you who worked with adult learners over the years know this is the case, that this is something that people think about quite often, quite a lot. Sometimes they'll agonize over it. Again, folks who have not had success in educational settings, not knowing what to expect, so they'll think on this long and hard before they make a move quite often. And so that kind of feeds into the next item there, that they're actively searching rather than stumbling upon a program. So when they know that they want to pursue something, they'll go out and use the internet and other means. Primarily the internet would be the primary way to see what's available. So that these students are often, or prospective students at this point, are often thinking about going back to school, but doing advertising, being proactive in terms of getting, having a web presence as well as ads and signs and other promotional materials, still very important. And a number of students mentioned that this sort of triggered their action. One student said, well, there's this sign that was always at the bus station, and that he almost saw it as a sign to him that he needed to go ahead and pull the trigger and make that call. So having that out in front of them, because different people, depending on what's happening in their life, they may be ready to move on this, and when they are ready to move, making sure that it's present and people know that these programs exist. So how to get the word out? The most frequently mentioned, again, when we asked folks for ideas on how do you reach prospective students, was the internet and social media in particular. Very common, especially among younger students, probably not a surprise there. Instagram among younger students, very commonly mentioned. Facebook a little bit more so with older students. Again, not a surprise, probably, but looking at what you are doing, if anything. I mean, our work here at the Florida Literacy Coalition, because we have a statewide hotline, we're now, in part because of the results of this market research project, are doing more in terms of Facebook and Instagram. We weren't doing anything on Instagram before, and now we're doing Facebook advertising. It's pretty affordable. You can you can do it in a fairly targeted way. So you might want to take a look at that. Everybody who's online is pretty much using YouTube, so YouTube ads are another way that you might want to get the word out. Signs, billboards, posters, flyers, especially in areas that students may frequent, also can be a powerful way to get the word out. Newspapers, TV, radio. A few folks mentioned radio and TV, although they seem to know that TV was probably a pretty expensive way to go, and nobody mentioned newspapers. So when we asked them about what they would search for on the internet if they were looking to find a program in their area, and really you want to make sure to get your, if at all possible, to get your search results right there on the first page of the Google search, or whatever search engine they're using. But for the most part, people are using Google. These were sort of the themes. These were actually some of the suggestions, and a lot of themes correlated with this. Closest place to get my GED, adult literacy, learn to read, ways to get my diploma, GED programs near me, these kinds of things. So as you're looking at sort of search engine optimization and trying to figure out ways, keywords to embed in your website and to raise the odds that people will see your program, you might want to kind of keep some of these in mind. Of course, referrals and word of mouth, that's golden. That's the best way to go. It's always a big plus, and utilizing your own adult learners as recruiters and ambassadors for your program, it can be really a powerful way to get the word out, and asking them to talk it up on their own social media. So we tested certain terminology out and had some interesting results on this. In terms of sort of the takeaways from this, this response to ABE, or Adult Basic Education, I should say Adult Basic Education, we weren't using the acronym, was not positive, and that's this is a term that we use with frequency in our field, and especially with the two community college-based programs. Pretty negative reaction to this terminology. They equated it to sort of low quality. So they were looking at the word basic, as sort of being less than good. And when you think about it, out in the marketplace, people don't use that term very often. Even the cheap dog food is called premium dog food. We need to be cognizant of that, I think. And in some cases, some students felt it was sort of potentially offensive. So let me just share with you a few of the quotes around this, because it really kind of drives home this point. One student said, "So basic says that I'm giving you the shorthand version." Another student said, "That is like we're getting the basic, like the bare minimum." Another one said, basic, you should already know it. So when I'm reading that, I feel insulted. One student sort of was looking at it from a little bit different perspective, said, I don't feel it's basic for me anyways. It's been a long time since I've been in school, so it wouldn't be basic for me. And then one gentleman, he was probably in his early 20s, said, nobody's going to take that seriously. If you're having a conversation with someone and you say, "Oh, I'm in adult basic education," so take it for what it's worth. But if you're using that terminology, you might want to kind of revisit that. They were much more open to adult education in general. Got much higher, higher response, better response. Literacy received generally favorable reaction. And that was something we were encouraged to see. Everybody didn't necessarily know what literacy meant, but they knew it was they had positive connotations. There were a couple students who felt, well, this doesn't really describe what we're doing here, or what I'm doing. I know how to read. They had one guy said, I'm not really sure what literacy means, but I know what illiteracy means. So that's something to kind of take into consideration. But certainly with the Adult Literacy League program, it had very favorable response. And in general, it had a favorable response. So that's good. Mixed reaction to the term learn to read. We showed sort of a website. It had, up top, learn to read in big bold letters. They much preferred, and this is across all the groups, that, you can touch on those skill levels, and that's part of what you'll be working on. But, working on improving your reading skills, working on improving your writing skills, these kinds of things, got a little bit more favorable response. Generally a favorable response to college and career readiness, although there were some concerns with the lower level students that this was something that wasn't quite ready for them and wasn't right for them. might be at a higher level, and so they were concerned that they might be getting into something that might be beyond what they're comfortable with. Another takeaway was the response to the GED, and so there quite a few of the students were studying for the GED or about to study, in ABE and GED preparation programs. And the word GED, they basically preferred diploma or high school diploma quite a bit over the GED. One student said, you can call it what you want, but when I get it, I'm going to call it my diploma. And in Florida, the GED is a state of Florida issued high school diploma. It actually says that rather than a GED. So that's something, at least for us Floridians, that we can really play up, not to in any way deny that they're getting their GED. They weren't really saying that, but there is some negative connotation, at least from the viewpoint of these students, around the GED. We should probably be trying to work on that as well. But letting them know that at the end of this process, once they pass the GED test, they will be getting high school diploma is very important for them. So we're going to take a quick poll here and get your response to something. These are some slogans and catchphrases that we shared with some of the students. And what I'd like for you to do is go ahead and select the slogan or catchphrase that you feel is best of these 5. We're limited to 5 here. The one that you think really would resonate most with students.
All right, Greg, I opened that poll up, so we'll give everyone about 30 more seconds.
Okay, very good.
Okay, I'm going to close out the poll and share the results.
Okay, very good. So you all should be seeing these results at this point, right, Nicole?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So here you go. So 0%. Nobody thought that a second chance to get your education really resonated. It's never too late to learn. Received the most votes, 44%. Adult education, a pathway to career success, 15%, 8% for GED, yes you can, and 33% for learn more, earn more. So let's see how that compares to the students in our focus group. So let me share right from the beginning that we shared more options. We had 9 options here. Our polling feature only allows us to do 5, so I selected 5 among these. You all are right on track with most students that it's never too late to learn was the highest vote getter. Now we did ask students to select their top 2, and then we asked them to select a little bit different, to select than what I just asked you to do, to select the one that they like the least. So it's never too late to learn. A second chance to get your education, also pretty good, and that didn't bode well in our poll here. Adult education, a pathway to career success, sort of a little bit middle of the pack there, and it was sort of that here on the poll that you all did too. It's interesting that learn more, earn more, and that's a phrase that we had used too for our hotline promotion. Didn't test well. You all had it as the second choice favorite, but as you can see here, learn more, earn more the only votes it got were negative responses. So it wasn't something that really resonated. I was kind of surprised that the GED referenced one also didn't do quite as well. And you all, I guess, weren't so surprised because that was a little bit lower on your spectrum here. So definitely the themes around sort of going back to school, it's not too late, a second chance, these kinds of things really seem to resonate well with students. The families learning together, grow together. In fairness, these weren't family literacy programs. Maybe that would test a little bit better in that kind of setting. In the adult adult education pathway to career success, as I mentioned, also sort of on the higher end of the spectrum, but not quite at the top. So thank you for sharing your votes there. We also asked students to share with us their thoughts on having student testimonials and the benefits of that. And it was pretty much universal that this was a good idea, even before we sort of gave them a video to respond to, which I'll share with you here in a minute. This was a quote from somebody in one of the groups that I thought it kind of reflected a number of statements that were made about how you have some fear at the beginning of the whole thing, and if you see a video or if you hear about stories, things of this nature, that really helps people believe that they can do it themselves. So I'm going to share with you the video that we shared with the students. It's a student at Depora's place. This is going to have a little bit of a slow response here, I believe. Oops, I'm going to. It might be a little stilted.
That I was in a rut. I knew that I had to do something to help myself. I began to come to classes, and it really helped me. It's not easy, but anything that's good sometimes it's not easy. You have to work for it. I have improved greatly. There were books that I had no idea that I would ever read. I knew that I was on the right path because I realized that education is so important. Education is like power. I know now that I can speak better. I feel now that I have a better chance. I feel now that I have an avenue. I think if I try hard enough, I can.
Okay. Oops. I'm sorry. I think I didn't close that out. I think I needed to. Okay. So, so the students' reaction to this was very positive. They loved they really responded to the authenticity. They talked about that. She's real. She's she's walked the walk. She's telling it like it is. They like the fact that she didn't candy coat it. That it's she stated in there clearly that it's not easy, but if you stick with it, you can succeed and persevere. A number of them responded to the fact that she was older, and so that also resonates with older people and younger people. This is somebody who kind of getting back to that theme of it's never too late to learn. So certainly, I know it's not new. A lot of programs do it, but what we found when we looked at a number of websites, and we looked at websites both here in Florida and across the country, 60, 70 different websites, to kind of get a sense of what folks were doing around promotions, that the programs often will have testimonial videos, but they'll be geared a little bit more to funders and to volunteers and so forth. So putting them front and center, and not to say that there aren't programs that do this, but making sure that they're front and center and using videos, not really long, keeping them within a few minutes, can be a powerful way to get those folks in the door, especially those who might be on the fence. So I'm going to turn our attention to sort of the website design and navigation. As I mentioned, we've kind of taken a look at quite a few websites, and we shared several of them with adult learners in the groups. And these are some of the themes that sort of resonated. Some of them are probably fairly common sense, you know, to read, understand, navigate, sharing important information from the get-go around cost, around program location, around services offered, very important. I don't know how many of you have a FAQ on your website, but that is something that also came out as an important piece, just like many of us when we're going and looking for services or products and so forth. You want to kind of look at some of the frequently asked questions, and so having that, and I would certainly encourage your students to kind of give you some ideas on what some of those questions might be, and as people are kind of taking a look, they really want to get a good idea of what they're in for. A few websites that we saw had introductory videos, and not the norm, certainly. It was in the minority, but sort of giving a good sense of what the program was about, maybe hearing from some of the students. Again, not long, but kind of giving them a good sense of what to expect, what the environment's going to be, and so forth. Using video, using images, a very good response to images, but they were most favorably responsive to authentic images. They saw the difference, you know, versus stock photos, taking pictures of real people in real settings, very important, and at least they felt so, and that those were the ones they were really drawn to. Addressing potential concerns and doubts. This could be something done in an FAQ section or other sections, you know, just trying to, you know, be upfront about the fact that the students will have, potential students will have some concerns and doubts, and that you can, you know, share some information that might be able to address some of those, and certainly letting them know that you're available to talk. If they do have additional questions, they seem to, in fact, most of them preferred telephone as a contact mode. We did share with them an online form from Arkansas, I believe it was, that required a bit of personal information, and then they kind of get back to you. You know, if you had questions and so forth. They did not like that at all. They much preferred a telephone contact or walking in, especially with the Adult Literacy League students. They tended to, a number of them preferred just being able to walk in and talk with somebody face to face. So the menu terms piece, I think, was an interesting takeaway from this. We asked them to respond. You know, we were looking at the menus, giving them a few different options in terms of where would you go, showing them the website. Where would you go to get information about, you know, getting a tutor or joining a class, you know? And so they're interested in instruction. So programs and classes was preferred over what a number of organizations use, which is students or adult learners or learn more, things of that nature. You know, those students and adult learners, intuitively to us, maybe that means, you know, if you want to be a student, click on this. But to many of them, that meant that that was really a section for their existing students. They were not students yet. So, you know, they were expecting to go to programs to get information. And sometimes organizations will have in the program section stuff that's geared a little bit more to sort of general information or fundraising or volunteers and so forth. So be cognizant that that's the section that students are going to be going to quite frequently to learn about your programs. So the biggest takeaway recommendation I would have is, you know, because this was a relatively modest effort, it had some interesting results, we thought, and we've gotten some good feedback on it, but utilizing your students as a resource, you know, that's, you all have expertise right there in-house. If you're a local program, utilize your adult learners. They're a tremendous resource. You can do focus groups like this, or you could do it less formally. Please don't rely on written surveys only. That can be a part of the, you know, a part of what you do, but, you know, there's certain richness and certain comfort level When you're sitting around the table, you put these students at ease. We had a market research professional work with us to do this, but you certainly don't need one. And if anybody's interested in getting a copy of our discussion guide that we used, we'd be happy to share that. Or just interested in talking with us about sort of our process for this, because I think you would have a real advantage over what we did, because if you're doing it for your local program, you can certainly customize it for your own needs. So, use your students, and they can be really important contributors to helping you to get the word out and to make your program a success. So at this point, I'm going to stop, and I have some more that I'm going to share with you about some additional research, but if anyone has questions about sort of the market research project that we did, we'll stop here and answer questions. And Nicole is going to kind of help facilitate that. So do we have any questions so far, Nicole?
Yes, we have a few questions here. The first question, in correctional facilities, adult education is considered by some inmates as an escape from a harder job assignment. That was a comment.
Okay, well, that's a good point. Yeah.
We also have another question here. Did you ask if they prefer student or adult learner?
Yeah, actually, I think we did reference that. There wasn't a strong preference either way with this group of people. I don't think people thought of students as being sort of less than, and at least we didn't see any evidence of that, or adult learner for that matter.
Okay, and that's all for the questions for now.
Okay, no other questions?
Nope.
Okay, well, good. So we'll go ahead and move on. We'll have another chance for questions here shortly. So I want to share with you a little bit about some additional research that Dr. Margaret Patterson has conducted. And I believe Margaret, I just found out right before this session that Margaret had signed up for this session. So Margaret's online, and we'd love to, if Margaret, if you can hear me, if if you want to say a few words, we can certainly open up your telephone to do that. And I don't know.
Good afternoon. I hope, can you hear me, Greg?
Oh, yes. Hi, Margaret.
Okay, super.
Thank you for doing this. Yeah.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I wasn't expecting this, so I'll keep my.
I don't want to put you on the spot either, to be honest with you, but if you want to kind of kick us off on this, I'd be happy, because you're the expert on this. I just, shared a little bit from all the extensive research that you've done, which I've been so impressed with.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yes, critiquing adult participation in education, fondly known as CAPE, was a project that I did with Value USA, the Organization of Adult Learners, back in 2018. And we were sponsored by Dollar General Literacy Foundation to go ahead and do that research. And Greg has a lot of stats here and a little bit of information, and I believe he also has links to the first 3 CAPE reports that came out that year. We've been doing some additional research looking at the data since then, and have some sessions on that coming up, actually starting this spring. So if you're going to COABE or some of the other national conferences, you're very welcome to look for that, and we're certainly hoping to get that out in publication as well. But you can find the reports and the information on CAPE on either researchallies.org or on valueusa.org. Either of those websites has it. But we were really excited to have the opportunity to get out into states. Greg mentioned earlier that we only reach about 10% of the people who have the need for adult basic skills in this country. And that came out of PIOC research that I had done. A lot of you have probably heard of PIOC, the International Data Set on Adult Learning and Workforce. But it came out of that, and we were able to go to 5 states, including Florida, and to talk with lots of folks and really get at some of the root causes of what was preventing them from getting involved in adult education. And the difference between my study and what Florida Literacy Coalition did was primarily that we talked with people who were not in adult education rather than those who were. And so you get very, well, somewhat different perspectives. But I absolutely loved what Gail just said in the video. Education is like power. I think that's totally true, and it definitely reflects what we heard in the CAPE study as well. So I'll turn it back over to Greg, but thank you for including my research in this presentation.
Okay, Margaret, and if you don't mind staying on the line in case you can kind of keep me honest here if I'm missing anything that you feel is important.
Sure.
So these are, I just pulled, and again, this is very extensive research, much more so than our small market research projects. So I was just pulled a few things that sort of resonated with me. This slide just basically sort of sets up who was part of the group, and as Margaret just referenced, these are folks who haven't participated. So 75% of them have not participated in adult education at all. The other 25% had at some point in the past participated in adult ed, although the majority of those had done so for less than a year. The earnings level was quite low. I think even for adult education, 84% of the students earned $18,000 or less. So we're really looking at a very low income population here. And I think that was in part, and Margaret, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but reaching out to, at least here in Florida, homeless shelters and other social service programs to get students to participate. And you can see here that formerly incarcerated adults, homeless, recovering substance abuse addicts, adults with disabilities were all sort of part of the mix. This too was a group, if I understand things correctly, Margaret, that was predominantly students who spoke English as their first language.
Right, correct.
And so, yeah, largely African American and Caucasian students were part of the mix there. And so let me share just a little bit of some of the results here. Margaret took a look at deterrence to participating in adult education, and these are the rankings in terms of how frequently they were mentioned. Top deterrent was transportation or lack of transportation being a huge issue. This is probably not a surprise to a lot of programs. I hear this quite often, and you know, it can be a tough one for programs to deal with, but certainly not insurmountable in many cases. In rural communities, I know it can be especially challenging, and we'll be talking here in a minute about some of the potential solutions on transportation because students had some interesting ideas on this. Family needs, the biggest item there that was most frequently mentioned under sort of that category was childcare, having affordable, safe, trustworthy childcare. Certainly having on-site childcare was a real plus for those programs that are able to do that kind of thing. Other sort of family concerns, adults with disabilities or health issues, things of that nature. Did I encapsulate that category okay, Margaret, or is there anything?
Yep, you're doing great.
Okay, good. Now, cost issues, money issues, cost of the program, but certainly going beyond just the cost of the program, but cost of transportation to the program, you know, and maybe lost revenue opportunities. You know, people's time is valuable, and people want to do something where they're going to get, you know, it's either enjoyable or they're going to get good return on their investment of time. And so, you know, real cost in terms of money and cost in terms of time, and in some cases that time could be used to earn money, you know, it's certainly a consideration as well, and a possible deterrent. Support systems or lack of support systems, having reliable help and emotional support from family or friends that would enable adults to begin and complete adult education successfully was mentioned. These are sort of groupings here. Influence of the past, and So these are kind of categories that are sort of situational deterrents, like transportation, and then others that are sort of more dispositional deterrents, such as this one, influence of the past. This was the primary one, or fear, anxiety, these kinds of things. And so past influences certainly impact, as we know, and those of us who've worked in adult education, decisions of adults about whether they want to engage in education again if they've had a poor experience in the past, you know, how they perceive their struggles with education and their ability to be able to be successful. Everybody wants to be successful, and so if you haven't had that success in the past, that can be a huge deterrent. You know, folks, I think we probably all spoken to students who would just say, you know, I'm just not good at that book learning stuff, and so they certainly have certain conceptions of what that might be, and that's one of the big challenges that programs face, you know, on the front end. Community pressures, when students might be facing certain sort of anti-education pressures from friends or neighbors, coworkers, and things of that nature, and then work and job, which I thought might rank a little bit higher, but still important, around you know, schedules. A lot of times people are working jobs that you know, they have erratic work schedules. Maybe their work is not close to the school location. You know, things that sort of are work related that may be deterrents that you know, that would prevent them from participating in adult education. Their hours, you know, if they're working during the day or evening when classes are offered, things of that nature. So did anything important I missed there, Margaret?
Nope, it's all good. Keep going.
So the solution side of it, which I think really is probably the more interesting piece in terms of really asking students really for some ideas. And I'm not going to be able to touch on all of them. There's a lot of good, rich data here to look at. You know, they were looking at solutions on the transportation side, including things such as maybe a van service or organized ride sharing or carpooling through the program. And I know this kind of things often done informally, but maybe kind of helping to coordinate that or make it happen, aligning bus schedules with class times, things of that nature. I recall that there was a program up in Massachusetts, and this is some years back, that kind of got organized, and the students led an effort to go to the city council and were successful in advocating for a local van, or a van service for some of the students who didn't have transportation. This was in a sort of a more rural area. So, you know, that's a tremendously powerful thing, you know, learning those kinds of and implementing advocacy skills. And that may be unusual, but certainly looking at creative solutions to transportation, you know, that's a huge barrier, but kind of looking at it programmatically, how you can help students to get to your location, and having your services offered in areas where they can easily access those. And that kind of leads over into the educational settings piece too, and looking at various educational settings that and things that the educational settings can do. And I'm actually going to circle back to that one in a minute, because I thought that had some more interesting components. Support systems. Some students suggested adult education, you know, create support groups, cohorts. I don't know if they use the term cohorts, but, you know, groups where they can kind of come together. I'm going to quote one of the students from the study. Working in a group, you get to know other people and see their struggles, and then if it is the same thing you are struggling with, and they got a different way of doing things, you can share your different ideas, and maybe that way will be better for you. So I think this is a strong testament to the fact that bringing people together, developing those bonds. And I know, at least here in Florida, it's not unusual for adult education programs to have sort of an open entry, open exit, where people can change from week to week. But certainly this sort of piece lends itself to maybe a little bit more of a semester or managed enrollment piece, or other ways that you can deal with it, even if you have that kind of system. to bring students together to feel that they're part of a group. That relationship building piece is important with both the teacher or tutor as well as with other students. Family considerations, in addition to providing child care, perhaps elder care, things of that nature, recognition that programs, can and should be family friendly, and that parents can, learn strategies to instill in themselves and their children. There's a lot of times, I know people are motivated by, helping their kids out and trying to capitalize on this, and that's where family literacy comes in. But even if you're not, mounting a sort of a traditional family literacy program, recognizing that that family piece is important, and if there's opportunities to involve the family or have students involve their family. I know, Margaret, you referenced a student who was from, grew up in a foster care environment, and, maybe could have used some direction in terms of sort of, the parenting skills side of things. And so these are the kinds of things that programs, I think, working with students, getting an idea what their needs and interests are. You might be able to do certain things programmatically to really promote sort of a more family oriented or promote sort of family values, not, and I use that term sort of more sort of, empathy and persistence and overcoming adversity and good character and so forth, which is really part of the self-encouragement piece too. This is I think this was the primary item that was referenced in terms of a dispositional solution, that self-encouragement, persistence, finding strength, pushing forward, working through adversity. Something that I think programs can be proactive on. I know we've done some work here in Florida, and it's pretty common in the K-12 world to kind of look at growth mindset. I don't know if folks are familiar with Dr. Carol Dweck and sort of the growth mindset theory, or Angela Duckworth and her work on building grit with students. This session's not about that, but it's really worth, I think, exploring, because there's some real strategic things you can do to help students understand that they are capable, that the brain is malleable and they are capable of learning things, even things that are, difficult for them. Money issues or cost issues, groups actually debated, if I'm understanding this correctly, Margaret, whether there was a cost for participating in adult education. I guess.
Exactly. Yes. Does it cost me anything? And in some cases it does, definitely.
Right. So what are those costs? Being transparent about those costs. Students recommended potentially providing scholarships for those who couldn't afford it. Reducing costs for taking the GED or high school equivalency test. Even some interesting things around sort of supporting efforts to build micro businesses. Anything else in that category or any of these other categories, Margaret, that you think are worth highlighting?
I think I would go back to the whole notion of support systems, as that's a topic that I've been working on very recently with some colleagues. And what's important about that is that because a lot of people do not have the financial wherewithal, they do not have family that's involved in their lives or that has their back, so to speak, that having some type of a support system is going to help them get through the door, but it's also going to help them stay in the program. And that's really, really critical, because if you can recruit people, but if you can't keep them, if they don't stay with you, if they don't have the supports to be able to make it, they won't last very long. And so it's a very important consideration. Okay,
excellent point. I want to mention on the money side real quickly, because I think it's apropos to this time of year. We do some work in financial literacy, trying to promote financial literacy as part of the adult education experience. And I know other programs around the state around the country are doing that as well. state and country. You know, we pointed out what the earnings level of these students were, and in our experience has been that a lot of these folks are, you know, living, you know, paycheck to paycheck, to sort of, you know, use a common phrase there, but really are on the precipice of sort of a financial crisis or living in sort of a financial crisis mode. And it can be difficult, absolutely difficult, when you're trying to get by on such low income. And certainly we're trying to help students to improve that situation and be able to get skills to be able to move up the ladder and get higher paying jobs and family sustaining wages. But this time of year, and I think hopefully most folks are familiar with their earned income tax credit, and opportunity for low income families to get an infusion of cash. And there's been some interesting work, and this is not tied to Margaret's study. I just wanted to kind of give an aside here about looking at ways, research-based ways to really encourage students and have a real frank conversations. What are some of the ways that they can save money, put aside an emergency fund, use that infusion of money that they get from the earned income tax credit, which can be, you know, $3,000-4,000 or more, depending on what their family situation is, to be able to have a little bit of money to, you know, for a rainy day fund, because those rainy days come up, unfortunately, and that can kind of just derail people in a really significant way. Dealing with emotions, those emotions that are tied to being in a program and maybe not succeeding as much as they'd like, as quickly as they'd like. Anything else on the emotion side, Margaret?
Well, I think it goes hand in hand with what I was just saying earlier about the support systems, is that, you know, people need emotional support as well as the financial support that you were talking about, and the other aspects. They have to be able to pull all the pieces of life together, whether it's how they feel or those situational things that are out there in order to come through the door, unfortunately.
Yeah, very good. And then technology, and I'm going on here a little bit long, so I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. But Margaret's one of the three components of the study looked at accessing and use of technology, and I think there's a lot here that I'd really encourage you to go in and take a look at. 62% of the students participating used were currently online. 24% had been online previously. And that's an interesting point, because it's not a static thing. There can be inconsistencies in terms of people's access. They have access at some points, and then, you know, they don't pay their phone bill or what have you, and then they don't have access anymore. Age, you know, there was a clear division there. We saw it in ours, but Margaret, in your work, those millennials and sort of those first two groups, younger and older millennials, definitely were much more tech savvy and online, as opposed to Generation X and baby boomers. Of 1/3 of the baby boomers had reported never having been online. So that's something we definitely want to make sure, I think, that we're cognizant of that, and for those older students, that, you know, that technology piece may be a little bit more challenging, but adult education can be a great way to do that. Now, what are they doing online? I don't have that here, but the most frequently mentioned item was watching videos. YouTube's really very popular, and doing social networking. Only a small percentage, about 17%, said that they used the internet to learn basic skills like writing and math. 9 and 10 used their smartphone primarily. There were some differences between sort of urban and rural access, in addition to age. And when asked how they would most like to learn something new, most chose to learn by themselves, either using technology through print or with some help from a tutor. I want to circle back real quickly, and this is the end here, sort of that adult educational settings piece from Margaret's research, asking students, what can we do in our educational program to kind of help facilitate and get people in the door and be successful And so here's some of the items that were mentioned: soliciting input on locations, of course, exploring ways to provide adult basic education instruction, along with employer and job training, offer a variety of start times for instruction. I think some of them even said really early in the morning, right, Margaret? Like you go to the gym kind of thing.
6:30 a.m. Yeah.
Morning, yeah. I wouldn't be showing up for that one, but I'm sure for certain people, that's a neat option. Offering tutoring or study groups for adults who are struggling. So if folks are falling behind, they're getting some special attention potentially, and allowing adults, especially older ones with disabilities, to learn at their own pace, not having to, that pressure of kind of keeping up with the rest of the class. Childcare, we've already talked about. Considering adjusting policies on testing. Can you give us a little bit more on what that means? Were they talking about?
So it was primarily having to do with high school equivalency, with GED testing.
Okay.
That the testing policies would enable them to either get through faster or not have to pay so much money for retakes, things like that.
Right, very good. And then certainly using technology and in providing one-on-one guidance and instructions, or those wraparound services. So here's links to, and we kind of provided this in the PowerPoint, to Margaret's research and also to our white paper. And certainly thanks to the Department of Education here in Florida for making this possible. I know I'm a little over on time here, but if anybody has any last questions, we'll sort of open it up for that, and then we'll wrap up. Any questions?
We don't actually have any new questions that have come in.
Okay, well, very good. Well, thank you, Margaret. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a great presentation.
Thank you, and thank you all for participating. And again, the CAPE reports are on the Value website, and ours are on the on our website, our white paper, and be on the lookout for our part 2, which we'll be looking at working with ESOL students in sort of market research. We just finished up some of our focus groups, and I think we're going to have some interesting things to share on that as well. So thank you, everyone. You have a good afternoon.